Moltes gràcies, Toni. Gràcies perquè, a més, has començat entrant amb el concepte consciència. Has parlat... Nosaltres, com a Agència Catalana de Turisme, estem impulsant una transformació del màrqueting per orientar-nos al viatger conscient, al visitant conscient, a l'experiència conscient i, òbviament, a les empreses conscients que fan possible aquesta experiència conscient. I és per això que quan vam estar començant a definir el disseny d'aquesta sessió especial de la 13a edició del Fòrum TurisTIC, en el que parlaríem de la revolució gastronòmica, no podíem deixar de vincular la revolució gastronòmica amb la consciència necessària per que aquesta revolució gastronòmica sigui realment transformadora i ens ajudi a crear un model productiu regeneratiu. Qui es pot pensar al món que més i millor ens pot parlar de regeneració que la senyora Anna Pollock? Thank you, Anna. Thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you because you are probably the first voice in the world with authority to talk about regenerative tourism. And it's for the reason that we are today here. It's for the reason that you are not only today, just 1 week working in Catalonia, helping us to develop our strategies in regenerative tourism. Perquè l'hem convidat durant tota la setmana, perquè la vam convidar ja des de la setmana passada, perquè la tindrem aquí fins al diumenge, perquè com que és una viatgera conscient, vol fer un viatge conscient i vol aprofitar al màxim, no vol fer un viatge llampec d'anar i tornar en un dia, i per tant ens ajuda a desenvolupar, a guiar, a orientar el desenvolupament del producte al nostre país. Anna Pollock porta 52 anys d'experiència en el món del turisme, 52 years of experience in tourism as a consultant, as a strategist, as a change agent. Transformació seria la paraula que defineix el seu rol. És una activista de la regeneració. I com a activista de regeneració crec que valdrà molt la pena que la puguem escoltar. Anna, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hola, buen dia. Thank you very much, Patrick, for that beautiful introduction. I'm very happy to be here with you talking about my favorite subject, the aspect of regeneration, where we bring food, farming, and hospitality together. So I've got an awful lot of material to share. I suggest that you really focus on the headlines of each of my slides. You're all going to have access to all of this material to study later. But my presentation is based on 3 parts, really. First of all, and I'll go through this really quickly, why must we consider regeneration now? Then I'll go on to what it really means. It's becoming a little bit of a buzzword in the tourism community worldwide, but we still haven't done the work necessary to really fully understand its power, its potency, the depth of what thinking is required. And then I'll talk about this food farming hospitality nexus at the end. So, why do we read regeneration now? Well, we're running into trouble as humanity. We're also running out of planets. By 2030, we're going to need 2 planets, if we could find an extra one, in order to live sustainably on this one. And by 2050, it's projected we might need 3. Now, I'm no astronomer, but I haven't seen any other planets coming in our direction. So this really means we've got to take notice. Sustainability is not proving to be enough. The planet's vital signs, which have been described as planetary boundaries, are all flashing red. As I say, I'll go through this really quickly. And we in tourism are also in trouble. We are supposed by 2030 to be reducing our emissions to a certain extent. It's best presented in this crazy graph. The green lines upwards is the growth in emissions projected going forward. The red line coming down is what we should be doing in terms of reducing our emissions. That is a whopping great big gap, as I think you'll see. And the reason I put a question mark on it is, to me, this describes or explains what the term cognitive dissonance means. When you can hold 2 ideas in your head simultaneously, 2 opposing ideas in your head at the same time. because obviously we can't live with that gap for much longer. Look, putting tourism in context, and this is something that a lot of us fail to do. We get so absorbed in tourism and hospitality matters that we forget that we are a derivative economy. We're utterly dependent on the overall economy. We're utterly dependent on the health of the environment in which we work. And unfortunately, again, and I'll get rid of the bad news quickly, but you have to really come to face this and recognize what it is asking of each of us in terms of our response. But this is one of the earlier reports from the Post-Carbon Institute that described our current position as a great unraveling. And they identify these 11 specific topic areas, all note that they're separate, they're looked at separately, when in fact we now know that they are all utterly interrelated and interdependent, and you cannot look at any of these in isolation from the other. But it's still pretty serious reading. So much so that this complexity, this growing complexity, this mishmash of issues, the fact that they are compounding each other, is we need to need to deal with that. So what do we do as human beings? We come up with another word, we come up with another term that implies we understand what it all means. And a couple of years ago, the head of the World Trade Organization was one of the first major institutional leaders to describe it as a polycrisis, which is a cluster of these global risks in that great unraveling list, all of which are compounding each other, and the sum of which exceeds the individual parts. So if that word wasn't enough, we had to have later on another one. This also from an economist who, it's an older expression, but we are experiencing a metacrisis. And why is it important to notice the difference between a metacrisis and a polycrisis? Polycrisis is, as you could see, a collection of issues, but the metacrisis is pointing to the fact that they're not just entangled, they're not just interdependent, but they actually share a common root cause. And it's pointing to what I was saying earlier, that we cannot look at the surface of things, we cannot look at each of these topics individually, we have to get to the root cause. And that now is being, in the literature I'm reading, and even in the news I'm reading, people are waking up, they're becoming conscious of the fact that all of these problems actually reflect the way that we see the world and the way we make sense of it. And that is the current way we see the world is not working because it's not in alignment with the reality, with the way things really are. So in that context, I think you will agree that incremental change is not going to be enough. That means just doing things differently. And with all due respect to all of our efforts in sustainability, when obviously that's not working. Everyone is, people now use another favorite word, we need transformation. We need a fundamental shift, as I say, in our way of seeing, being, and doing. And Einstein, who was right about a lot of stuff, I think he was only wrong about a little amount of stuff, Einstein really pointed us to this many years ago when he said, the world we have created, in other words, our current situation, is a product of our thinking. And we cannot change this out in the outside world until we change the way we think about it, the way we see it. So the problem cannot be solved with the same amount of consciousness that created it, or the same kind of consciousness. And one of my teachers, I haven't met him yet, but I've taken courses with him, a brilliant science writer who's done more to help us understand this shift in perspective, basically sums it up this way. The root cause is a crisis in perception. So, what is another word that is used to describe that bundle of assumptions about how the world works, that leads to our beliefs about how the world works, our values, and then our action, is called a paradigm. That's a very, very powerful word. Sometimes, to make it more accessible to people, it's often described as the story, the collective story or narrative that we have internalized as human beings to enable us to work together on the planet. We need a shared understanding, probably, in order to get on. If we all had a fundamentally different paradigm, it gets complicated. It gets actually very difficult to communicate. In fact, Donella Meadows, one of another great thinkers in systems science, said, you know you've got a paradigm when you try and have a conversation with somebody else and they just don't understand what you're saying, because all of your fundamental assumptions and beliefs are actually quite different. And you can see this happening now as we become a much more global society. We are working with and coming to meet people whose paradigm is actually quite different to ours, particularly, for example, indigenous people. They have a very specific paradigm, a relationship with the planet Earth, the relationships with each other, which we'll talk about again and again and again, because there are so many matches between the way they see the world and the way our current thinking in the Western, particularly the global North and the Western perception is. So right now, I would argue that we are literally in a period of enormous change. I often say to people, you've asked me to speak in 20 minutes about the biggest, and thank you for the extra 20, by the way. You've asked me to speak about the biggest shift in human consciousness that's taken place probably in the last 400 to 500 years. When we had the beginning of science, the Age of Enlightenment, the beginning of science then, and that led to the Industrial Revolution. That shift in consciousness about how the world worked, if you remember before that, they were arguing about how many angels you could fit on the top of a pin. This is what preoccupied some of the monks in the monasteries back then. That way of seeing the world was replaced by this very different way of seeing the world, seeing reality as something that you were able to look at objectively and measure and describe quantitatively, has led to this paradigm we all are operating in. The basis of that is really to say we're living on a machine. The planet Earth works like a machine. We can describe it objectively. We can see the relationships in terms of cause and effect, essentially. So we call it the machine story, and I think some of this will be familiar. First of all, we fragmented it all and put things in boxes. Remember that long list I had earlier from the Carbon Institute report? We tend to begin to think that we're independent of our place, that especially now, it's all about go global, global, global. We're not rooted back in the land that raised us. It's extractive. It loves to look at standards, make things efficient, therefore make them all the same. That's why we can have a coffee house that goes from a tiny coffee house in Seattle to one that is several thousand outlets and around the world. That's Starbucks. That is considered a success. It tends to assume that the resources of the planet are there for us to use, to make things, and then to sell them, and then to throw them away. This is our current paradigm that we're embedded in. It's highly competitive. It loves top-down control. Power can get concentrated with those that can hoard the most. And it's also, because of everything I said in the first few minutes of this talk, now very vulnerable. Science and our understanding from other cultures is giving us a very different story, a very different paradigm, and that is we're not separate from each other. We are not separate from the natural world. We are the natural world. We are nature. We're in constant interdependence. We need to be rooted back in soil, in the communities, as opposed to inhabitants of a planet where we have no relationship with those places. We need to start thinking about generating value, not extracting value. We need to understand that nature herself is abundant. Yes, there is a degree of competition. There's different there is a place sometimes for competition and predator-prey relationships, etc. But there's so much collaboration that takes place in nature. In other words, there's a fundamentally different set of rules that guide how we should behave on planet Earth. So I think, do you find that quite familiar, this ocean that we might be in two worlds at the same time? Do you know people that you know that are talking very differently about life, and you sometimes don't understand them? I'll leave that to you to decide. So, to reinforce this, we are in between two stories, and this, by the way, is a natural phenomenon, because nothing in nature grows forever. The curve, I think you are aware of, it starts very slow, and whatever we're counting, it could be we're counting tourists. In 1950, there were very few. That it rises, and then it peaks, and then it falls, and something else comes along behind. And this graph shows exactly that. Right, I believe that we're right in that sort of top part of that curve where it's dropping down. It's what worries us all is now the speed with which that is happening. But underneath that decline are individuals, individual businesses doing different things, sowing seeds of these new ideas, because this new system, this regenerative system we're calling it now, is emerging from this. So although it's a bit scary when you start to read in the press stories of collapse and all the rest of it, this is a natural process, and we can make that difficult, we can make that easier on us if we wake up now to exactly what's happening and play our part in making that transition as less painful as it need be, or as it might be. So these are little maps of where we are. I think this one is a really important one. If you can follow it, it's what is we're being asked to do? We're being asked to shift from this machine-based paradigm that is essentially extractive to one that is now based on living systems principles that is incredibly productive with enormous potential to live a much more flourishing life. There is enough on planet Earth for everyone. It's just that we have to change the way we think about our relationship to it. But also this graph is useful because it shows we are on a journey. It's just a graph, it's just an image, but there is this flat line in the middle that shows how we have slowly moved from simply extracting value. Let's think back to the Victorian era and the 1900s when we were either busily extracting resources and making things or killing each other, one of the other. But then we were extracting value to realizing that we were actually doing harm with our industrial processes. Rachel Carson, I always look to as one of the really early pioneers in waking us up with her book Silent Spring, when our pesticides were actually, causing birds to fall out of the sky. I remember that. Most of you are way too young to remember that. But that led to the environmental movement in the 1980s and this notion that we needed to sustain life on this planet so that we could pass it on to future generations. Now, many of you in this room are the future generations that were supposed to be passed on. And yet, what did you see in the earlier presentation? That things are significantly worse than they were then, which is why I'm saying sustainability, unfortunately, is not working. But the fundamental idea behind that was do less harm. And again, we are humans. We're always trying to improve ourselves. It's good news, not bad news in that sense. And more recently, we've realized it's not enough to do less harm. We have to start doing more good and become more positive. In tourism, that's unfortunately again been misunderstood and miscommunicated, that the traveler should leave a place better than they found it. Well, I'm just going to throw that idea out the window, please. It's not the responsibility of a traveler to leave a place better. It's the responsibility of the host in that place to do that. So the reason I show this diagram is that for us, to get to the other side of that and to start to work in harmony with nature, we have to have that paradigm shift. And what is that paradigm shift? Well, first of all, the picture partly says it, because this is one animal that is capable of regenerating itself. This is an ajolote. I did it right, yes. Little animal I met in Mexico. You cut off a limb and it immediately grows it back again. So that is what life does. It grows things back again. So I'm sorry for all the words here, but I did put them up here on the understanding that you could read them later and translate them at your leisure. But the most important thing I want to say is that regeneration is not a buzzword. It's a set of actions, methods, outcomes, a whole new way of thinking and understanding, and it's going to take some effort on your part to understand it. But the dominant paradigm, as I've described, sees tourism as an economic machine, an engine, extracting value and labor to create trips, operating according to three fundamental rules behind it of profit, minimize cost, and grow. The new paradigm would ask tourism to see itself, for you and I, to see itself as a living system comprising of living beings living on a living planet and subject to nature's operating principles. And the good news is we can understand how nature works. Nature is very effective and efficient in a way because she has a set of operating principles that basically apply to the smallest microbe you can think of, or even a smallest cell, right the way up to the planets. These patterns repeat, repeat, repeat. They're called fractals for that reason. So all life, what does life do? If we can understand that and follow those principles, maybe we can get ourselves out of this mess, if you like. And what life does is she creates the conditions for life to thrive and evolve. And if you take away only one idea from this presentation, could you keep rolling that thought in your head? Ask yourself, what does that look like? How does it affect my behavior? How do I help life thrive and evolve? If you're a parent, you're doing that on a daily basis. You have children. You are helping them to thrive and grow and evolve. So it isn't that difficult. An awful lot of this stuff is quite familiar to us when we listen to our inner selves and do that inner thinking. So it is basically the systems change we need, and it's about developing that capacity to evolve and thrive. Now I'm going to suggest get into this relationship between what we do in hospitality, and I'll use that preferably to tourism at the moment, and how we interrelate that with agriculture, because food farming and hospitality are intimately related. So we have in agriculture right now, we are seeing that transition from a machine story, which was beginning to dominate our production of food in the world. And again, you can read these words later on, but this is essentially a description of that industrial food production system. It's only one part of not all food is produced that way. In fact, most food is produced not by large industrial cooperative companies, I should say, but by much smaller, localized, community-based, place-shaped, small farming operations. So they have that difference between the big concentrated power and the distributed large number of small enterprises. We have that in tourism too. And this is why there's a lot of confusion, because there are, in fact, two kinds of tourism. There is the tourism that is dominated by that machine paradigm, which has to get bigger, go global. These are the big brands, the big airlines that have to travel the world. They're not place dependent. They move people from one place to the next. Highly extractive, using standardized methods, etc. All the things I talked about before. Ownership tends to be concentrated more and more, and smaller and fewer hands. Very much oriented towards top-down decision-making. And again, as I said, it's showing signs of vulnerability. At the same time, 96% of businesses in Europe in tourism and hospitality are SMEs, small, medium-sized enterprises. And most of them don't actually need or want to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They're happy in their location. They want to have a stable business. They want to have see that they're helping the community flourish. They want to be respected. They want to serve. They want to run an effective business, but they want to have meaning and purpose in their lives at the same time. So you can see that, hope you see that comparison. I hope that makes sense. So what features do they have in common? Well, I've just been describing them. In regenerative agriculture now, which is really what's happening in the smallest operators, as I said, they're small. They're utterly dependent on and are now actively working to make sure the primary ingredient in their success is building healthy soil. If you look at regenerative hospitality, again, it's smaller enterprises, and their primary source of health and success is having healthy people in flourishing communities. So both of these business types, farming and hospitality, have these similarities in common. It gets down into more practical things on the agriculture side. You're looking at water retention. They're looking at producing more nutritious food, the diversity of crops, being resilient, but they're rooted in place. They're rooted, their feet are in the ground, as it were. The same is true of these emerging regenerative hospitality. When I say emerging, in many cases, an awful lot of these businesses that are out there we're looking at emerging have been doing this long before the word regeneration was used. But they're looking at maximizing benefits to the community and minimizing leakage, whereas on the big industrial side, that isn't always even considered or counted. So they're very much oriented toward enriching meaningful experiences, a diversity of experiences, but they're both, again, rooted in place. If you're a hotel or a restaurateur, you can't just go away. People come to you. So you are utterly dependent on what is going on around you. And what do they both bring them together? Well, it's food, wine, and it's this notion of terroir. Okay, what's in gastronomy, this word terroir, of course, it's French. It means, the land of which we come from. Was used quite a long time ago, but now we're talking about this notion of being rooted in place and expressing the uniqueness and individuality of each place. And that's what in Catalonia you're doing exceptionally well, I would argue, on the basis of my short week here I've had. It's a very full week, by the way. So do you see why I'm suggesting there's a real opportunity when we start to bring these two together? The other reason is that food is the primary change agent. Food is what, when we want to have a good conversation or you want to sort something out with the kids, you have a family meeting, you pull them around the table. If you want to get on with the neighbors, you say, come on over for a drink or a meal. So it connects us in a beautiful way. We begin to relax, we begin to get back into our humanity. It obviously revitalizes and nourishes us, but it acts as this connecting dynamic, if you like. We can attract others and connects them. It also, as I just mentioned, can be used to express our unique identity and culture. You have a beautifully unique culture in Catalonia, and the gastronomy is reflecting that. And I think in some of the discussions I've heard, you're encouraging people to take pride in that and make sure that when the visitor comes, they're not eating something that came from thousands of miles away. Obviously, food is a real indicator. It's like of how healthy is the land, how healthy is our water supply. It's a wonderful way to remind us that we are dependent on that natural world for our livelihood. It generates livelihoods. It also can be used to educate, and one of the points I'll make in the remaining 18 minutes I have is that it provides us an opportunity to use gastronomy, to use food, to educate the general populace of this need to adjust to a new paradigm, to see life differently. I think we have a very important educational role. It sequesters carbon, obviously, and it heals. It heals is a wonderful word because it means two things. One, we assume it makes us healthy and alive, but also it's attached to the word wholes. It makes us complete. So when we change paradigms, 17. Oh yes, Q&I, thank you. Thank you. I've been just brought in to check here. Thank you, that's important. All right, I'll go even faster. Thank you. Because we want to have a chance for questions. So the commonalities between farming and hospitality, both are experiencing a shift in purpose from volume to value. Both are experiencing a shift into the lone individual supplier battling the elements on their own to want to now working in community, to being supported by community. Both are going from being indifferent to place to celebrating place, from being producers to being stewards and hosting, and from selling products to delivering multifaceted experiences. Agriculture is easier to describe. I'm going to just quickly, these are all the things that agriculture does differently in order to be able to describe as regenerative. That's the beauty of that, because you can actually point to whether somebody is following a specific set of practices. In hospitality, it's much more difficult because we don't have a set of practices. But the reality is we are already in hospitality in the revitalization business. We do heal and make whole people when they come at the end of the week, really very tired. We do revitalize them. We do help them get in touch with their senses again, either when they're eating the food or we're taking them out into the local area to have a walk or a hike or whatever it might be. And we do and are creating experiences and encounters that are rooted in place. So how do we do that? Well, this is my attempt at graphics. It's very simple. I have no. This orange blob, or this blob, describes all of us operate in a place, if you can follow my. And in that place, there is an ecology, there is nature, there is life, there is vegetation, there are animals, there is water, there is everything you would describe as the natural world. And that is an incredibly important part of place, on top of which we bring our culture, our history, our economy, our community. So what is hospitality about? It's about a host who also is utterly embedded in all of that and reflecting the uniqueness of those factors in their place. And then along comes the guest, who is going to also be immersed in that, and they have what's called an encounter. The encounter is actually where the real exchange takes place, is the real source of value for all parties. And if that encounter is designed well, it can result in amazing result. So I'll leave this one and this one because you can read it. This is getting technical. This is what the students need in order to pass an exam. But basically, it's the types of regenerative experience. But we just spent the last week reading about 16 amazing examples of what happens when you bring hospitality and farming together, and I'm just quickly going to show just a few of them. This is in Sitges, and it is an amazing family that have this small piece of land. They have a vineyard there that they were able to inherit, provided that they guaranteed they would look after the Malvasia. Sorry, I knew I'd get it wrong. I've practiced and practiced, and I've still got it wrong. Malvasia. Okay, absolutely beautiful wine. What makes this special is it's surrounded by urbanization, and also they have in there the most beautiful church, chapel, surrounded by a home for elderly, 100 elders living in the home. And they get involved in talking to the visitors. They've created a wine museum. The whole thing is integrated and very alive. It's very different. And what I want to show is that when you put food, wine, and farming together and your imagination, you can do so many other things. This is L'Olivera. Again, you're probably very familiar with them. They are a foundation that works to support marginalized people and so on, but they're now looking at working to rebuild their dry stone walls, and bring people in to help do that, but also give more jobs to people on the margins. But again, an interesting combination. Sumarroca we went to, a beautiful winery, several hundred acres, family owned, and they obviously do wine tasting, they do ecological tours, etc. I thought it was really neat. They've identified their forest is full of birds of prey, and this is one vehicle for them to reach out to the local community and the children and the families who wouldn't otherwise come to have a wine tasting in their local neighborhood, but to learn about birds of prey, which they use for pest control. So it's another way of linking one activity, wine and food production, with the natural world and educating the customer. This one is another fantastic little operation, only 2 people that started back. Anna on the left inherited a small olive grove in, I can't remember the specific area, but she knew nothing about farming. Her grandfather had had this land. It was deteriorating because he was getting older. She found out after he died that she had inherited it. Fortunately for her, she had a partner who happened to have been studying permaculture and agriculture. And so on the basis of that, they took the plunge and said, well, we have to look after this land in his memory and for life in general. And in 3 years, they've taken what was really a neglected, degraded piece of land, and it's now beginning to show signs of health. And the best indicator of that is butterflies and bees. So very finally, we've had this opportunity to see what you're doing in Catalonia, and I'm just really, really genuinely impressed with what is possible. My passion, I started really looking at this in 2021 when I put out a paper. At the time, everyone was worried about carbon. And I felt at that time, tourism was responsible for 8% of emissions. Agriculture is between 24 and 35. And I was aware that many, many farmers wanted to get into switch to regenerative practices and start to heal their land and get the soil back in shape. But they couldn't always make that transition because the minute you take the chemicals off, your yield immediately, in the short run, it goes down. In the long run, it's going to go way back up again, but you've got that gap. And many of these farmers could really be assisted by relationships with the hospitality community. So that's how that paper started, and we can circulate it. But since then, it's become very clear that it's not just about carbon anymore. It is about carbon, but it's really very important that we start to look at the water cycle and how we manage water. The hospitality industry is hugely consumptive of water. But all of that affects climate, land degradation. Again, you've seen, just briefly alluded to stories of people really repairing the land. All of this is absolutely vital. And to me right now, I would say, let's stop arguing about, are we certified, not certified? Is it regeneration? Is it sustainability? Why not, as a hospitality community, can we not turn our brains and our hearts and our, and our muscles actually to really contributing to bringing our land back to life? Because that's what's going to ensure our success or not. So I'm going to leave it there because I'd like to think that I have created some curiosity and some questions. And I'm aware of the timer clicking. So please make use of the 8 minutes that we have left and ask me any questions. As I said, I hope this has provoked some interest and you can see these relationships.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna.
Good.
What inspiration are you giving us? What guidance in all these projects, the 16 experiences that you are helping here in Catalonia? I think it's a really privilege to have Anna with us, helping us to develop this regenerative model for tourism in the future. But now is the time to have questions for Anna. Some questions from the public? Yes, there? The cube? Yes.
Excuse me.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna.
You're welcome.
It's a fantastic idea about regenerating, and it strikes us very much because we're all the time thinking about sustainability, and then you're creating a different paradigm. My question is, how about politics? Because there's a huge shift in the economic paradigm, in the industrial paradigm, but the political paradigm is one of the largest threats to it.
I think you're completely right. First of all, regeneration is an idea that's been emerging outside of tourism from the last 10, 15 years. We now have people really talking about regenerative economics, regenerative healthcare, obviously farming. So it's not my idea. I'm taking the thoughts behind that and saying, how could we bring that into tourism and hospitality? Yes, we're in a period of, as I said, huge change, and we are being polarized essentially. There are politicians taking full advantage of that. There are also politicians that could see the benefit of this. My feeling at the moment is if you are committed to doing something like this, really start now to work, start talking about it in your communities. Ultimately, the change will happen when enough people say this is what we want to do, not what you're telling us we ought to do. There is all kinds of evidence at the small scale level that when you do make this transition, your income actually does improve. The income not just to you, but the benefits also improve to those around you. But I can't go into that in the next 2 minutes. But I'm glad you've raised it, because in the final analysis, although I believe that change will happen from the ground up, we do need to get a new kind of leadership in there that's going to support that. And that means, just as I say, working as community and making sure that your local politician sees what's going on and supports you in these endeavors to bring health and flourishing back, where I think in many places it's gone. Thank you for the question.
More questions? Some other questions? No? I just have the last one for you, Anna. In your opinion, which are our main assets in Catalonia in order to be successful in this revolution of regeneration in our destination? How can we develop these flourishing destinations, and which assets we have in order to have it?
The biggest asset right now is, well, you've got the land, you've got the climate, although again, you've got a problem with water which you have to deal with. And some of the land definitely needs bringing back to life. But most importantly, when you get out, as we just did, meet the people, and I'm looking at your biggest asset is in the room. You're here. And it is actually up to each of us. I think you're in a better position to take a leadership role right now, because you've already established a wonderful reputation for the food, the diversity of it, the quality of it. The diversity of it is very important. Traveling around, when you get out of Barcelona and you've got an infrastructure, I mean, your road system is there. You can connect people. But I think really what it's coming down to right now is creating a much wider sense of possibility. The reason I think this is so exciting is wherever I've looked at these kind of activities taking place, the recovery by nature is so fast. That young couple that I said came to degraded land just 3 years ago. And every year, I mean, it's hard work, what he's done, they have done. But now you can see the results. So when they first came into this community, all the locals said, oh, these guys are going to last about 5 weeks. What do they know? Came from Belgium. Anna is a pianist and a harpist. She's a musician. What on earth is she going to do? So there was a lot of, skepticism. And then as they started doing things differently, there was people peering over well, you don't have hedges here, but they're peering over the wall or whatever it was, saying, oh, what are you doing? That won't work. Then next year when they got the results, oh, yeah, how did you do that? So now he's not only doing his farm, he's being asked to apply these techniques next door. So, it's taking that first difficult step. Maybe what we need more than anything else is courage and guts and determination and a few other things thrown in. But I think you could be, I've not found a destination yet willing to put energy into this. And I have been asked the question, well, 95% of our tourism is on the coast and it's highly urbanized and industrialized. How does this apply? Well, again, we've got many examples from around the world where the big brands are now beginning to realize that if they want to retain staff and motivate staff, they need to be doing things in the community where those people work and live. And so there's all kinds of stories that we could tell if we had more time, where this kind of regeneration is happening within urban areas. It could be a lot of tree planting, it could be a garden on a roof, or et cetera, et cetera. But there are certainly ways in which those urban areas can start to show a movement in this direction.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you. And see you soon in Catalonia.
Thank you.
Hope so.
Thank you very much.